Welcome to this introduction to Crossroads to the West, a virtual tour of winter quarters, Canesville, and the other Mormon settlements by the Missouri, 1846 to 1853, created by the Historical Pioneer Research Group. This is an interactive story of the early Latter-day Saints at the Missouri. Here they stopped temporarily, hundreds and thousands of them on both sides of the Missouri River, while moving westward from their homes in Nauvoo or from the British Isles and Europe to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. Many of them died here. Great were their trials, tremendous their sacrifice. We envision the wagons and the boats pulling in from the east and from the south, while others were leaving these grounds to make the long march up the Elkhorn, along the waters of the Platte, up the valley of the Sweetwater and over the Continental Divide, and finally to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. All of this area, including Council Bluffs across the river and Florence on this side, was once a place of great industry. Here wagons and handcarts were built. Here oxen, cows, and other animals, seeds and plants were gathered together to move to the west. Gordon B. Hinckley. Yes, here along the confluence of the Platte and the Missouri rivers was the great crossroads to the west. Thousands would cross the Muddy Mow and venture to the Rocky Mountains and to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. This was also a crossroads of conflict and conscience and decision. While many thousands went west, still hundreds stayed. Yet some who sought the valley would return from the Salt Lake Basin to the fertile plains of Iowa. Whether in the Salt Lake Valley or along the Missouri in Iowa and Nebraska, all shared the heritage that is the story of the crossroads to the west. Our purpose is to identify the people, places, and events of the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, helping to preserve for descendants of pioneers and all who share in their legacy their story of faith and fortitude. In this project, we focus on winter quarters in Canesville and surrounding areas. It is the story of the pioneers who settled in the hills and hollows along the Missouri River as they waited to trek west to the Great Salt Lake Basin. The project is arranged as a virtual book, with each chapter telling a segment of the story of the early pioneers and their sojourn at the Missouri River. This work is the result of over 58 years of research by the noted historian Gale G. Holmes, sharing his knowledge of the history of this historic area with supporting maps, photographs, audio recordings, artwork, and videos. Our focus is on people. Who were those who lived or traveled through this crossroads to the west? Places. Where did they live, work, worship? Where were they buried? Events. What was their experience? Did they stay or go west? The first project of the Historical Pioneer Research Group was the Early Latter-day Saint database found at earlylds.com. At this website, pioneer names can be searched, individuals located, family data gathered, and information unique to the area history found. Crossroads is our second major project. It was created using Map and Tour, an innovative cloud-based tool which creates custom 3D maps. Crossroads can be found at mapandtour.com/view/crossroads. Our goal is not only to gather, preserve, and share the history of a people, but create an opportunity for all to experience this place of such great historical significance along the Missouri River, where so many proved their devotion to their faith and commitment to the covenants they had made earlier in Nauvoo, in the face of a great sacrifice. Come, Let's explore the story of the pioneers. Here is Crossroads to the West. The project is organized as a digital book, with all the parts of a typical bound book. See here the introduction, the preface, and chapters. The first 4 chapters give the history in chronological order. Chapters 5 through 7 list places in alphabetical order. Let's explore each chapter for just a moment. Chapter 1, Gathering at the Missouri. This tells the story of an outcast people who, after 4 long months, arrived at what was then the border of the United States. Chapter 2, Grand Encampment. As more and more wagon trains arrived from Illinois, they began to settle near Mosquito Creek. The new campground pushed further and further back towards the east, and so as the thousands of pioneers gathered, the camp grew until it was about 9 miles long and 4 miles wide. Here you can see an outline of Grand Encampment. Chapter 3, Crossing the Missouri. Winter Quarters. Learn here about the Mormon ferry system and the establishment of winter quarters. Chapter 4, Leaving Winter Quarters, the Trail West. A portion of the Mormon Trail from winter quarters to the Elkhorn River is given here. Chapter 5, Returning to Canesville. What was once known as Council Bluff, with a few cabins, became Miller's Hollow, then Canesville, and again Council Bluffs, a major outfitting town for all trails west. Chapter 6, Surrounding Communities. Pioneers spread north and south out of Canesville, seeking wood, water, and grass to provide for their families and animals. From Preparation in the north to McKissick's Grove in the south, some 100 miles along the Missouri River, these early saints established some 90 settlements. Chapter 7, Mormon Pioneer Cemeteries. Pioneer families lived in these temporary settlements for up to 7 years. During that time, people fell in love, married, bore children. Some died and were buried. There are approximately 65 known cemeteries, and many are yet to be identified. Creeks from an 1875 Pottawatomie County map. These early settlers built their communities near to sources of water, and for that reason, the knowledge of the waterways is vital to identifying settlement locations. Here is what the waterways look like today. You can see that the course of many of the rivers and creeks have changed over the years, washing away, in some instances, settlements and cemeteries. And finally, we have historic maps from 1875. These maps help us to identify owners of land and where churches, cemeteries, schools, mills, and roads were located. Let me share with you a few of my favorite locations in the project, places that may help you to envision the world that the early saints knew, experience the spirit of place, the pioneer story. In Chapter 1, Gathering at the Missouri, let's visit Council Point. Council Point in 1846 was the primary shipping and receiving port on the Missouri River in the area. Here in this bubble, we see a link to members of the Council Point branch, photographs of what it looks like today. Here is an illustration of a rope walk, a place where cable and rope were made, important for many reasons, but especially for the use in the ferry system. Then there is a drawing of a steamboat, a sight often seen by the river in 1846 to 1853. With the technology we have today, we can actually visit the site, driving there using GPS, and taking with us a virtual historian. Here we have an audio file from Gail Holmes. You can take your historian with you on location, as the Crossroads project is available to you on your mobile devices. Yes, there is an app for that. Here Brother Holmes described Council Point.
As you look southwest, very flat country. The reason is that is the old riverbed. You see on the right, just beyond these trees, the rise, that's the bank. That's the north bank of the river.
Next, let's go to Grand Encampment, Taylor Pratt, or Redemption Hill. This was the first headquarters site at the Missouri. On the top of this hill was to be found Brigham Young's tent. Nearby was a long pole with an American flag tied to it, so all could know of his location. This is the place where Captain James Allen came to talk to Brigham about the enlistment of 500 men for the Mormon Battalion to fight in the Mexican War. Trying to imagine what the area might have looked like in 1846 is made much easier with this sketch made by Thomas Kane. Thomas drew Taylor Pratt Hill. If we zoom in there, you can see the American flag blowing in the breeze above Brigham Young's church headquarters tent. Next, we're going to Crossing at the Missouri, winter quarters. It wasn't an easy task for families with their wagons, oxen, and other animals to cross the muddy mow. There was no bridges that crossed the river from the United States to Indian Territory. Brigham directed the building of ferries. Here, not too far from Council Point, is the Middle Mormon Ferry. Hold on tight. Let's take a virtual tour across the fast-moving waters of the Missouri, narrated by Gail Holmes.
After Reuben Allred had made 2 huge cables, one was stretched over the river and downstream half a mile to the lower Nebraska Dugway. The second cable was stretched across the river and upstream half a mile to the upper Nebraska Dugway. When the boat was settled in the Iowa Dugway, ox teams pulled wagons onto the boat. The teams in succession were unhitched, pulled around, and fastened to the wheels of their wagons. When all were aboard, the boat was pushed into the river and attached to the down leg cable. The Missouri River carried the Middle Mormon Ferry to the lower Nebraska Dugway. After the boat was unloaded in the lower Nebraska Dugway, an ox team treading in shallow water pulled the ferry boat up 1 mile to the north Nebraska Dugway. There the boat was attached to the other cable, and the river carried the boat back to the Iowa Dugway.
Imagine waiting for hours, perhaps days, for your turn to cross the river. Anxious adults trying to keep track of their families and animals. Restless children pleading, "Are we going yet?" Thousands crossed in just this manner. Returning to Canesville. Winter quarters was established and then, as per agreement, after 2 years abandoned. It's now 1848. Some families have gone west, but many must now return to Iowa. Great numbers to the Canesville area. Here we're going to explore a map created by Thomas Tostevin in 1854. This map, drawn by Thomas, a city engineer who had been assigned to survey the claims of squatters in the original town site of Council Bluffs. His map, along with the research of Myrtle Hyde, has helped us to identify many of the homes, businesses, and public buildings in early Canesville. Here is the location of the original log tabernacle built for the conference held December 24th through the 27th, in which Brigham Young was sustained as prophet and second president of the church. And not far away is the reconstructed Canesville Tabernacle. Here in this bubble The process of the building of the structure is given. At the bottom of the bubble is a link to a 360 panoramic photograph of the interior of the building. Walking inside, it's almost like being there. See here a wagon, handcart, and other tools used by these resourceful people. Wouldn't it be interesting to move back in time and see the village known so well by pioneers? Well, through the eyes of George Simons, an early artist, we can have a glimpse into the past. His drawings are held in the Council Bluffs Public Library. Here is his view of Council Bluffs in 1849 through 51. You can see his notation of the location of Broadway, a major street in Council Bluffs. See here, very faintly, written in pencil. Surrounding communities. Hyde Park is the most important historical site in Iowa. This is the site chosen by Orson Hyde for his family and his wagon train company members before he left to go on a mission to England in August of 1846 with John Taylor and Parley P. Pratt. When Brigham Young and some of the Quorum of the 12 returned to Kanesville after moving many members of the church to Utah, a special meeting was held at this location, in his double-sided cabin that looked much like his cabin in Kanesville. The voice of the Lord was heard and directed that Brigham Young step forward and assume full direction of the church. Residents of Hyde Park, hearing a loud noise, rushed to Orson Hyde's home to ask if there had been an earthquake. They were assured that all was well and that the Lord had spoken, and that they might go back to their homes and not worry. Mormon Pioneer Cemeteries. The Historical Pioneer Research Group has been active in trying to identify the lost and forgotten cemeteries of the area. One of those burial places is the Carterville Cemetery. Found on this hilltop pasture land are the grave sites of some 300 refugees from Nauvoo. Here in the bubble about the site is a report, photographs, and a video account of the day a survey was made with ground-penetrating radar to verify burials on the hill. Bob Sharp, the cemetery specialist for HPRG, explains in this video.
I'm part of the Pioneer History Research Group. I'm part of WICA, the Iowa Mormon Trails, and the Potawatomi Mormon Trails Associations. We've been doing work at the Carterville Cemetery for about 15 years. The story behind it, the town of Carterville was about a mile off to my left.
The next cemetery we are to visit is in Nebraska, Douglas County, the Mormon Pioneer Cemetery at historic winter quarters. Just up the hill on the second ridge from winter quarters is the burial place of those who died during the 2 years, 1846 to 48, that the Saints settled along the river in Nebraska Territory. The bubble gives the history of the cemetery, gives a listing of those buried there, along with an estimated location of each grave, shows a photo of one of the remaining gravestones, that of Amy Porter and her 2 sons, and the magnificent sculpture by Adver Fairbanks of pioneer parents burying a baby. The spirit of this sacred place can be felt if only virtually, as we visit by means of a 360 panoramic photo taken at the foot of the sculpture. Just beyond the cemetery, see the trail center? It is from that direction that families carried their loved ones from winter quarters up this hill to lay them to rest. They had left all moving forward with the hope and promise that their families would be eternal, because of covenants made in the Lord's house in Nauvoo. Because of their faith and steadfastness, a temple now stands here at winter quarters to bless families of this generation. Some have said the winter quarters period in church history is a story of great tragedy, but not so. Hear the words of Heber J. Grant. It has been referred to as the tragedy of winter quarters, but there was no tragedy here, for tragedy spells defeat and disaster. This was the victory of winter quarters, for here was faith and hope and charity raised to their loftiest pinnacles, while greed and selfishness were brought low. There are times and places in the life of every nation when great spiritual heights are reached, when courage becomes a living thing, when faith in God stands as the granite mountain wall, firm and immovable, while hardships, want, hunger, sickness, sorrow, and death beat down to crush. Winter quarters was such a time and place for the Mormon people. The Crossroads to the West is a history of a people who with undaunted faith left a legacy of their willingness to make and keep sacred covenants, to show charity to their fellow men, and sacrifice even their very lives if need be for the kingdom of God, not only for their families for generations to follow, but to a nation as they stood at the crossroads to the west. To learn more about the Mormon experience at the Missouri, visit Crossroads to the West to explore in deeper detail.